Most people assumed the walls in Attack on Titan were built to keep something out. That's what they told you. That's what every soldier believed. That's what generations of humanity inside those rings of stone accepted as the simple, brutal truth of their world. There is danger beyond, there is safety within, and the walls are the reason you're still alive. But that's not what really happened. The walls were never built to protect humanity from what lived outside. They were built to hide what lived inside. And the moment you understand that, truly understand it, everything you thought you knew about the Titans, the kings, the war, and the nature of power itself collapses into something far more disturbing than any monster crawling through broken stone.
Here is the question that should haunt you. If you built walls to protect people, why would you fill those walls with giants? Not station them nearby, not bury them underground as a last resort, but seal them inside the very structure your civilization depends on every single day. The thing your children play beside, the thing your soldiers climb, the thing you pray keeps you safe. Why would you do that? Unless protection was never really the point. This is where things get darker than most viewers ever let themselves go, because the true mystery of the walls isn't what lived beyond them. The true mystery is what the walls were, what they represented, and what kind of mind decides that the best way to guarantee peace is to make every living human being on the island an unknowing hostage.
Let's build the foundation, because you need to understand the architecture of this world before you can understand what's rotten at its core. The world of Attack on Titan runs on a biological weapon with no equivalent in fiction. The Titans, enormous, near-mindless humanoid creatures that eat people without hunger, without purpose, seemingly without reason. They are not animals. They don't hunt for food. They don't reproduce naturally. They exist in a state that can only be described as a curse given flesh, and that description is more literal than it sounds. Because the Titans are people. Every single one of them was once a human being, specifically an Eldian. A person born into the ethnic group that thousands of years ago entered a pact with a being called Karl Fritz, the first Titan, and inherited through that pact the power to transform. The ability to become a Titan isn't random, it isn't a disease, it is an inheritance, a bloodline, a chain that stretches back across millennia and binds every Eldian alive, whether they know it or not. Think of it like this. Imagine if every person with a particular surname carried dormant in their blood the ability to become a nuclear weapon, and the entire world knew it. Some nations would worship that power, others would fear it, most would eventually try to control it. That's the world outside the walls, a world that spent generations at war with Eldia, that watched the Eldian Empire use Titans to conquer and devastate entire civilizations, and that eventually, through betrayal, through politics, through the long, slow machinery of history, brought the empire to its knees. The king at the end of that empire, Karl Fritz, the 145th king, made a decision. And this is where everything turns.
Karl Fritz was not a conqueror. He was not a warrior. By every account embedded in the lore, he was a man consumed by guilt. Not his own guilt exactly, but the inherited guilt of what his people had done to the world. The Eldian Empire had used Titans as weapons of mass destruction for centuries. Entire nations erased, entire people subjugated. And Karl Fritz, sitting on the throne of that history, decided his civilization deserved to be punished for it. But here's the mechanism that most people never fully absorb. He didn't just run away to Paradise Island. He didn't just build walls and hide. He made a vow. Using the power of the founding Titan, the original power, the god-tier ability that can command all Titans and alter the memories of every Eldian alive, Karl Fritz rewrote the minds of everyone who followed him to the island. He erased their history. He took away their memory of the outside world. He manufactured an entirely false civilization, a fake humanity, a people who believed they were the last of their kind, huddled behind walls, fighting for survival against a threat they didn't understand. And then he built the walls, not from stone, but from tens of millions of titans, colossal titans, cemented into a sleeping formation 100 meters tall, shoulder to shoulder, waiting. Waiting for what?
For the vow to break. For the outside world to finally come for the island. For the moment when some future king might finally call upon the rumbling, the activation of every wall titan simultaneously, to unleash a wave of destruction across the entire world. Karl Fritz never intended to use it. That was his secret. His dark, quiet, monstrous secret. He built the most powerful weapon in human history, a weapon capable of killing every living thing on Earth. And his plan was to never use it. His plan was to let the world live in fear of paradise just long enough for paradise to be destroyed. He wanted his people to be punished. He wanted them wiped out. And the rumbling was not a deterrent. It was theater.
Sit with that for a moment, because it deserves to be felt. A king looked at his own people, children, farmers, soldiers, artists, every person who trusted him enough to cross the sea, and decided their lives were acceptable payment for the sins of their ancestors. He didn't ask them. He didn't tell them. He took their memories, handed them a false history, gave them fake religions and false hope, and then sat back and waited for extinction to arrive, like a man who has already made peace with dying. And for over a century, it worked. The people inside the walls lived. They built cities. They fell in love. They had children. They developed their own culture, their own language of gesture and protocol, their own military with its own honor codes and its own tragedies. They were, in every meaningful sense, a real civilization. Built on a lie, built inside a weapon, owned without their knowledge by a vow made by a dead king who hated them. This is where the horror of the walls stops being about titans.
Because the titans beyond the walls, the ones in the forests, the ones at Trost, the ones that swallowed soldiers whole, they were terrifying, but they were comprehensible. You could fight a titan. You could study it. You could develop gear and strategy and courage and push back against the darkness with human will. You cannot fight a vow written into the nature of reality itself. The founding titan's power is not just political, it's metaphysical. It operates on memory, identity, and the biological programming of an entire people. The king didn't just build a prison. He built a prison that was also the prisoner's entire understanding of existence. The walls of the mind are always stronger than the walls of stone. And outside? The world had not forgotten Eldia. The world had been spending a century building toward the moment it would finally feel safe enough to end them.
Here is the final truth, and it is more disturbing than the Titans, more disturbing than the war, more disturbing than death. Nothing lived beyond the walls of the world. Or rather, everything did. Humanity, civilization, history, art, war, children. The entire breadth of the human story continued, uninterrupted, on the other side of that ocean, while a manufactured fragment of humanity lived in deliberate ignorance inside a weapon they called home. The thing beyond the walls wasn't a monster. It was the rest of the world. And the rest of the world looked at Paradise Island and saw exactly what Karl Fritz designed them to see. A threat, a sleeping giant, a ticking weapon surrounded by water, filled with people whose blood could, under the right circumstances, end civilization. And so Marley, the dominant world power, the nation that had weaponized Eldians as Titan warriors of their own, began sending their Titans to the island, not to destroy it, not yet, to test it, to find the founding Titan, to reclaim the power that could let them control everything.
The mission that began all of this, the Titans beyond the outer wall, was not random hunger. It was a military operation. It was politics. It was the outside world reaching through the stone with giant hands, trying to take back what it believed was rightfully theirs. And the people inside the walls, Eren's mother, Armin's grandfather, every soldier in every corps. They died in a war they didn't know they were fighting for a century, without ever knowing the enemy had a name, without ever knowing the enemy had a grievance, without ever knowing that the very king they were raised to revere had already decided their lives were forfeit. Most people never realized the walls didn't fail when the colossal titan breached them. The walls failed the moment they were built.
There's a reason this story refuses to leave you. It's not the Titans, it's not the action or the tragedy or even the genocide. It's the question buried underneath all of it. The question that Attack on Titan is actually asking in every chapter, in every death, in every revelation that recontextualizes everything before it. What does it mean to be free? Karl Fritz chose a particular answer. He chose a world where freedom was managed, rationed, eliminated for the greater good of a peace that couldn't hold. He chose to make a civilization of people who were free in the only way a prisoner can be free, by not knowing the walls exist. And if you think about it long enough, it starts to sound less like fiction. History is full of Karl Fritzes, leaders who decided that their people couldn't handle the truth, who built narratives of purpose and identity and enemy and homeland on foundations that were, at their core, manufactured, who told themselves that the lie was merciful, that the people were better off not knowing, that control dressed up as protection is still protection.
The walls are the oldest political technology in human history. Not stone walls, conceptual walls, walls of mythology, of propaganda, of selective education, of manufactured consent. Every civilization that has ever existed has had them in some form. The difference in Attack on Titan is that you can see them. You can watch them being built. You can watch a king make the calculation in real time that a people stripped of their history are easier to sacrifice than a people who know what they're dying for. And then you watch what happens when one person, one furious, brilliant, broken person, decides he will not accept the walls. Eren Yeager doesn't break the walls because he's a hero. He breaks them because he is the inevitable consequence of a system designed to produce suffering and call it peace. He is what happens when you put 1 million people inside a weapon for 100 years and assume none of them will ever figure out how to pull the trigger themselves. Freedom, the show argues, is not given. It is not granted by kings or protected by walls. It is taken, and the taking of it is always, always violent. That is the philosophical horror at the center of this story. Not that monsters exist, but that the people who built the cages always believed they were building sanctuaries.
So what really lived beyond the walls of the world? A mirror. That's all that was ever out there. A reflection of everything humanity is when it is afraid. The borders it draws, the enemies it manufactures, the histories it buries, the people it decides are acceptable losses in the project of its own survival. The Titans beyond the outer wall were people once, soldiers from Marley, Eldians conscripted into monstrous service, thrown across the water to die in a conflict they didn't choose. The armies beyond the sea were people too, shaped by their own fears, their own propaganda, their own walls they couldn't see. And in the end, when Eren activated the rumbling, when the Wall Titans finally woke and began their walk across the world, it wasn't a victory, it wasn't a defeat. It was the moment the mirror shattered and every shard reflected the same face. There are no walls sturdy enough to contain what human beings do to each other when they decide the people on the other side are not really people at all. That's the thought Karl Fritz couldn't complete. That's the thought Eren couldn't escape. That's the thought that should sit with you long after this video ends. The walls were never about survival. They were about the terrifying, desperate, very human wish that if you build them high enough, you'll never have to look at what you've done.